Hey, what's up there? It's Michael Gora from Mega Command, and today we're going to talk about marketing strategy, and more specifically, we're actually going to talk about marketing management, because you can't really have a marketing strategy if you're not managing it into the future, if you're not checking up on the results, if you're not holding yourself accountable to what the strategy is supposed to be, then your strategy kind of falls apart. So management is very key in any organization, any business, any place where there's even a little bit of complexity. Management is very, very important. The more simple things are, when we were maybe like primitive hunter-gatherers, you didn't really need that much management. But as society becomes more complex, you have to manage all the different pieces in your life, because you don't have enough memory to actually remember all the stuff you're supposed to. So you need lists, you need different kinds of organization systems, and more importantly, you need rituals, you need heuristics, you need rules of thumb. The best business people aren't even the most intelligent. They're not even that smart. They didn't go to the best Ivy League schools. Sure, there's probably examples of that too, but the smartest business people just have the best common sense. They have the best rules of thumb. They have the best heuristics. And if you have the right heuristics, if you have the right rules of thumb, if you have the right kind of mental models that you can just swap out and change real quick, then you can build empires. There's actually a story that the Roman Empire was actually built by heuristics. Like the Roman Empire wasn't necessarily so centrally managed, but the Roman system was very heuristic. Everything they did followed a certain pattern, a certain rule. And you knew something was Roman by the way its character, the way the people behaved, the way it was built, the straight lines. That's a very Roman concept, the Roman numerals you see. So for example, I don't know if you've ever been in a Roman Catholic church, but all the motions, the way the people walk, are in straight lines, forward or sideways, and everything is extremely ritualistic. There's another concept of, say, decimation. Decimation, you may think of that, a decimation as destruction, but actually what decimation means, it comes from the number 10. It means to break apart into one of 10, so in the tens, decimation. And what decimation originally was they would actually, whenever, this was rarely exercised, but whenever, say, in the Roman military, they needed to discipline a certain group for desertion, they would make every 10th guy draw a straw, and every 10th guy, 1 in 10 guys, would get clubbed by the other 9, and he'd get beaten to death until he died. And that was actually the original decimation. That's where the word comes from. So the point is, there's always rules of thumb. There's heuristics that you need to adapt in your own life, or just more so refine in your own life to make sure everything is being managed kind of well, and you're reaching the results and the organizational goals you're trying to achieve. So, getting control of your marketing, getting control of your business, and getting control of your strategy. What is the best way to manage this? Everyone has their own little way of management, but I'm going to teach you the 3 steps that you really need to follow. And the way you fill in the details, the way you actually manage your own life, depends on each person. Each person has their own personality. And also based on personality, some people will be better at organizing certain elements of their life than other people are at organizing. That's more of a personality characteristic, but especially if you're an entrepreneur and if you're accustomed to a chaotic kind of environment, you should be especially obsessed about good organization, because the business world really functions on good organization, like accounting, anything to do with finance, anything to do with money making and stuff like that, all requires good organization. So being chaotic doesn't work in your favor in the business world. So 3 steps you should do. So the first thing I would do is assess reality and assess the way things are right now. Number 2 would be to break things up into separate groups and start creating categories, start separating things out. And then number 3 would be to layer and prioritize things in the right way and create priorities. So you focus on the highest leverage activities and you work from the highest leverage thing down to the lower leverage thing, if you ever even get to the lower leverage activities. And every activity that you do, you're maximizing the output from that activity. I'm going to read you a quote in a little bit that's going to explain that. But let's start with the first one. So the first one is taking a self-inventory, doing a self-management, and getting aware of the realities and the circumstances in your life. Before you can change anything, you have to be aware of what the world it really is. You know, the problem most people have is they just don't have common sense. They've never took risks. You know, they've been sheltered their whole lives. Maybe they grew up in the suburbs or something, or whatever. You know, you were sheltered your whole life and you don't understand certain things, and therefore you make mistakes because of that. Like, you make a mistake that, you know, a person that had a little bit more common sense wouldn't make that mistake. So, you know, what we have to do first is become aware of our own surroundings and aware of everything that's going on in our own lives before we can start changing things. Before you start trying to create rituals and trying to create this perfect system and organization system of your life, it's much more effective just to be aware every single day of what's going around you. And that includes, you know, stop thinking and stop thinking about things. But maybe you like work on breathing exercises. You know, people call it different names, but like just, you know, start exercising so you start getting blood flowing through your body. And just so you're awake and aware and you can just look around after you do, say, an exercise, or you say you do, you know, you just take a deep breath, you can look around and you can start assessing like, oh, you know what, like my work environment isn't conducive for me to be productive. I never even thought about that. And rather than doing something to change that right away, write that down and create an entire list of all of those elements. A second thing to do would be to track every minute of the day. Maybe not every minute of the day, but every 30 minutes, every 30-minute block of the day, you should track and write down the activity. At least your work day, you know, probably the whole day too, but at least your work day, whether you do it on your phone, but much more effectively just on a piece of paper as you're working throughout the day. Just do this. You should do this at least once or twice a year. You should just write down every single thing that you do. And whenever you get off track when you're working, you should just write down what you got off track on and why that happened. So anytime you're working, I'm just going to move something here. Anytime you're working, you should just write down throughout that whole 24 hours every single little thing you do, because we're actually creatures of habit, and you're going to discover things about yourself that you're going to want to change later. Number 2, once you've created this self-assessment of everything that's in your environment, you're taking a broad, big picture view, and you've put everything on a piece of paper, what you really want to do is start creating separation. Now is the time to start putting things into lumps, into batches, and into categories. Because the problem, you know, I usually get into, like, I used to try to clean my room, and I would, like, go through, like, a notebook and just look through that notebook for, like, a couple hours and like tear things out, or like look through folders, for example, and like throw away old papers and stuff like that. And then 3 hours later, I'm still looking through this folder or this, you know, or whatever, throwing out papers, and I still have like this whole messy bedroom. That was a problem I would get into as a kid. So really what you have to do is break things into batches so you can break every activity of your life, you know, we're talking about your business, into different categories. So if you have the financial stuff, that should be batched. If you have, you know, things that are related to marketing, that should be batched. And the categories you create should be based more so on the complexity of your own circumstances rather than using, you know, some sort of preset model. So if you're not a marketing heavy organization, you wouldn't have, you know, that kind of category. If you're not, you know, an organization that has a lot of inventory, that's not something you have to worry about. So once you create these categories, you can start creating these different elements of your life. The same thing applies to your own life too. So like you can have, for example, fitness and health. That's one big category. You can have finances and, career. That's like another category of your life. And then you can have, relationships and, hanging out with friends or whatever and like doing fun stuff. That's another category of your life. And say those are three important elements of your life, you would like to have balance. So you understand that mental model. You apply the same mental model to your business based on your own circumstances of your life rather than trying to create something new. Meaning that you already assess the way it is rather than trying to start from scratch. Okay, and the last thing is prioritization, which is putting things in order. And then focusing on the most important thing first and working down from the most important thing rather than the most urgent thing, which is just like the thing that's just in your face right now. You want to work on the most important thing that's not necessarily urgent. It could be, but not necessarily. And that is the most important thing you should focus on and put all your time towards. Okay, so I actually have a book here. It's by someone. I'm not even going to tell you who it's by, but I'm just going to read you a quote here. And this really hits it on a nail. It explains it better than I can even explain it. So here we go. Here I'd like to introduce the concept of leverage, which is the output generated by a specific type of work activity. An activity with high leverage will generate a high level of output. An activity with low leverage, a low level of output. For example, a waiter able to boil 2 eggs and operate 2 toasters can deliver 2 breakfasts for almost the same amount of work as one. His output per activity and therefore his leverage is high. A waiter who can handle only 1 egg and 1 toaster at a time possesses lower output and leverage. The software engineer using a programming language rather than like English, later to be translated by the compiler, can solve many problems per hour of programming. His output and leverage are high. A software engineer using a more cumbersome programming method of ones and zeros will require many more hours to solve the same number of problems. His output and leverage are low. Thus, a very important way to increase productivity is to arrange the workflow inside our black box so that it will be characterized by high output per activity. What is to say high leverage activity? Okay, so very important there. We want to be doing the things in our lives that yield the most output per activity. And we want to structure our days and structure our weeks in such a way where we start with the highest yielding, highest output, highest result-oriented activity at the beginning, and we work until that activity is complete before we move on to other categories, other batches, other lumps of our lives. And by structuring and prioritizing those things and those elements in our lives in a way that makes sense,